The sound of a chainsaw rips through the night. A hulking killer wears a mask of human skin. He chases his victims through a desolate Texas landscape. This is the world of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The film terrified audiences in 1974. It claimed to be based on a true story. This claim was both a lie and a chilling truth. The story of Leatherface and his cannibal family was fiction. But the real story that inspired it was far more disturbing. The real killer did not live in Texas. He did not wield a chainsaw. His name was Ed Gein, and his quiet life in rural Wisconsin hid secrets darker than any movie. This story is not about a fictional monster. It is about a real man, a man whose lonely existence twisted into a nightmare. The film gave us a simple villain. Ed Gein was much more complex. He was a product of his environment, a creation of isolation, abuse, and profound psychological damage. To understand the horror, we must look past the movie screen. We must travel to a dilapidated farmhouse in Plainfield, Wisconsin. There, in the quiet heart of America, a different kind of evil took root. It was a silent, patient evil that grew unseen for decades. An evil that would eventually shock the world. The legend of Leatherface became a part of American folklore. It taps into our deepest fears, the fear of the unknown, the fear of what happens when civilization breaks down. The movie suggests that such horrors lurk just off the main road, waiting for unsuspecting travelers. It tells us that monsters are out there, hidden among us. But the truth of Ed Gein's life is more unsettling. It shows that monsters are not born, they are made. They are shaped by the hands of family. They are molded by loneliness. They are forged in the quiet desperation of a broken mind. The film's tagline was unforgettable. Who will survive and what will be left of them? It promised visceral, unrelenting terror. But the true story of Ed Gein asks a different question. It asks how such a person could come to be. It forces us to look at the ingredients of a human monster. The story is not just about murder and mutilation. It is about a sad, strange man. A man who lived under the thumb of a domineering mother. A man whose only companions were the dead. The real horror is not a chainsaw. It is the silent decay of a human soul. The real story began in Plainfield, Wisconsin. It was a small, quiet farming town, a place where everyone knew their neighbors, or so they thought. In this ordinary setting, Edward Theodore Gein lived a life of quiet obscurity. He was a handyman, a bachelor, a bit odd perhaps, but harmless. That was the face he showed the world. He was the man who would sometimes babysit local children, the man who shared strange jokes with the men at the hardware store. No one suspected what he did behind the closed doors of his family farm. No one could imagine the secrets hidden there. The Gein farm was a place of isolation. It stood on the outskirts of town, decaying and neglected. After his mother's death, Ed Gein boarded up her rooms. He left them as a shrine to the woman who had ruled his life. The rest of the house descended into chaos. It became a workshop for his gruesome hobbies. Here, the lines between the living and the dead blurred completely. The outside world saw a lonely eccentric. Inside the farmhouse, a private universe of horror was taking shape. A universe furnished with the remains of the dead. This was not a Texas slaughterhouse. It was a Wisconsin tomb. The truth was discovered on a cold November day in 1957. A local hardware store owner, Bernice Worden, went missing. The trail led sheriff's deputies to the Gein property. They were not prepared for what they would find. The scene that greeted them was beyond comprehension. It was a house of horrors that defied belief. The deputies walked into a nightmare made real. It was not a place of chaotic violence like in the movies. It was a place of methodical, meticulous desecration. A place where one man's obsession had created a museum of the macabre. This discovery ripped the lid off the quiet town of Plainfield. It revealed a darkness that had festered for years. The name Ed Gein became synonymous with a new kind of terror. He was not a gangster or a serial killer in the traditional sense. He was something else entirely, a grave robber, a killer, a craftsman of human remains. His story forced America to confront a disturbing reality. The most terrifying monsters are not always the ones who scream and roar. Sometimes they are the quiet ones, the ones who smile and nod, the ones who live right next door. Edward Theodore Gein was born in 1906 in rural Wisconsin. His father, George, was a timid alcoholic, but the true force in the house was his mother, Augusta, strict, pious, and controlling. She saw the world as sinful and hammered her beliefs into Ed and his brother. Augusta's suffocating influence shaped Ed's entire world, teaching him that desire was evil and women were dangerous, except for her. This toxic bond would haunt Ed for the rest of his life. In 1914, Augusta moved the family to a remote Plainfield farm, seeking to escape the city's corruption. The farm became a fortress, isolated, bleak, and ruled by Augusta's iron will. Ed and Henry worked the land, cut off from the world and friends. The house was grim, their lives even grimmer. Henry questioned Augusta's teachings, but Ed clung to her. The brothers grew apart, trapped in a prison of piety and filth. The final threads of Ed's connection to the normal world began to snap. The only person who challenged Augusta's rule was Henry. In 1944, the two brothers were burning marsh grass on the property. The fire grew out of control. The fire department was called. When the flames were finally put out, Ed reported that his brother was missing. A search party was formed. Ed led them directly to Henry's body. He was lying face down. It appeared he had died of heart failure, overcome by the smoke and flames. There were bruises on his head, but the coroner was busy. The death was ruled an accident. Henry's death left Ed completely alone with Augusta. There was no one left to question her, no one left to offer a different perspective. Ed was now in his late 30s. He was a virtual hermit, his only companion the domineering woman who had shaped his every thought. He became her sole caretaker. Her health was failing. She suffered a stroke that left her paralyzed. Ed waited on her hand and foot. He nursed her. He read to her. He listened to her endless sermons about sin and damnation. His devotion was absolute. He was living out the role she had prepared for him his entire life, the loyal, sexless son. Augusta suffered a second, more severe stroke. She died on December 29, 1945. For Ed, the loss was catastrophic. The god of his world was gone. The center of his universe had vanished. He was now utterly and completely alone on the isolated farm. He was 39 years old, emotionally a child, and psychologically broken. The woman who had been the source of his fear, his love, and his identity was dead. He was now adrift in a world he had been taught to fear and despise. The loneliness was an immense, crushing weight. The silence of the farmhouse was deafening. He had lost his purpose. After her death, Ed took the first step into his private world of horror. He boarded up his mother's bedroom. He sealed off the parlor and the upstairs rooms she had used. They became a shrine, untouched, preserved, just as she had left them. He lived in the remaining rooms, in the kitchen and a small bedroom off to the side. The rest of the house became a tomb for his mother's memory. But her powerful presence did not die with her. It lingered, it twisted in his mind. Alone in the decaying farmhouse, with only his mother's voice echoing in his head, Ed Gein's mind began to unravel in ways no one could possibly imagine. After Augusta's death, Ed Gein was left alone in a decaying farmhouse, his grief festering into obsession. He became fixated on anatomy books and lurid tales of human experiments, searching for a way to bring his mother back. When resurrection proved impossible, he settled for collecting, stealing body parts from graves, targeting women who resembled Augusta. With his friend Gus as lookout, Ed robbed graves under cover of darkness, always careful to leave no trace. The trophies he brought home became his new companions, transforming his house into a macabre workshop. Ed was no longer just the odd handyman. He was the Ghoul of Plainfield, building a world where he was never alone. In the silence, surrounded by his gruesome creations, Ed finally felt a twisted sense of control. To Plainfield, Ed Gein was a harmless eccentric. Odd jobs, strange jokes, and awkward laughter. He kept to himself, never inviting anyone into his filthy, boarded-up home. The townspeople pitied his poverty, never suspecting the horrors hidden inside furniture and clothing crafted from human remains. Ed's bizarre stories about shrunken heads and homemade art were dismissed as fantasy. His isolation was his shield. No one imagined the truth. The very extremity of his secret kept it safe. Ed Gein hid in plain sight, protected by the town's inability to fathom his darkness. For years, grave robbing satisfied Ed's needs, but the thrill faded as the bodies decayed. He craved fresher material to complete his ultimate creation, a suit of human skin, a way to become his mother. The line between fantasy and violence blurred. In 1954, Ed murdered Mary Hogan, dragging her body home for his grisly work. The town joked about Ed's involvement, never realizing how close they were to the truth. For 3 years he lived quietly, his secret safe. But now he knew he could kill, and that knowledge changed everything. It was only a matter of time before he struck again. On a cold November day in 1957, Bernice Worden vanished from her hardware store, leaving behind blood and an open cash register. Her son, Deputy Frank Worden, found the last sales slip, a gallon of antifreeze for Ed Gein. Ed had been hanging around the store making unsettling comments. Frank and Sheriff Schley drove to the Gein farm, suspecting he might know something. The town buzzed with fear and speculation, unable to imagine the truth. Most blamed an outsider. No one wanted to believe the culprit was one of their own. As the sheriff's car approached the Gein property, Plainfield's innocence was already lost. They were about to uncover a nightmare. Sheriff Schley and Deputy Worden found Ed Gein calmly dining with neighbors, unfazed by their questions. While Ed was taken in for questioning, the sheriff searched his dark, filthy farmhouse. In the woodshed, they found Bernice Worden's body, decapitated, hung like a slaughtered animal. The discovery shattered any illusion of Ed's harmlessness. Back at the station, Ed denied everything until confronted with the truth. The mask slipped. He confessed in a flat, emotionless voice. The first layer of his secret world was exposed, but the true extent of his horrors was still to come. With Gein's confession secured, investigators entered the farmhouse, stepping into a nightmare. The squalor was overwhelming, but the horrors inside defied belief. Bowls made from human skulls, chairs upholstered with skin, and lips as window shade pulls. Masks and leggings fashioned from human skin, a suit made to become his mother. Even hardened officers were shaken, forced outside by the horror within. The house was more than a crime scene. It was the twisted reflection of Ed Gein's shattered mind. The news from the Gein farm shattered Plainfield. The man they'd trusted, who'd fixed fences and babysat children, was a monster hiding in plain sight. The town's trust was destroyed, replaced by fear and betrayal. Plainfield became a symbol of horror, its name forever linked to darkness. The farmhouse burned, but the story could not be erased. The legend of Ed Gein, the butcher of Plainfield, had just begun. Ed Gein confessed calmly, describing his crimes with chilling detachment. He admitted to murder and grave robbing, shocking investigators with his lack of remorse. The story exploded in the media, turning the quiet Wisconsin town into a spectacle. Gein, an unassuming figure, became a symbol of horror overnight. Was he evil or insane? The trial would try to answer that question, forever changing American justice. Court-appointed psychiatrists found Ed Gein profoundly disturbed. unable to understand the charges or participate in his defense. Diagnosed with schizophrenia, he was declared insane and unfit to stand trial. Gein was committed to Central State Hospital for the criminally insane. The public wanted justice, but the court saw a patient, not a criminal. In the asylum, Ed Gein faded into obscurity, his house destroyed, his story seemingly ended. But justice had one more chapter to write. After a decade in Central State Hospital, doctors declared Ed Gein competent to stand trial. The courtroom revisited the horrors of his crimes, but the real question was his sanity. The jury found him guilty of murder, but then ruled he was not guilty by reason of insanity. Instead of prison, Gein was sent back to the hospital where he would spend the rest of his life. The shocking story of Ed Gein seeped into the American subconscious, inspiring Robert Bloch's Psycho and Hitchcock's legendary film. Norman Bates, a quiet motel owner with a dark secret, terrified audiences with horror that felt disturbingly real. In 1974, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre amplified Gein's gruesome legacy, creating Leatherface and a new slasher template. Both films drew from the same dark well, forever changing horror cinema. Ed Gein's story shaped some of cinema's most chilling villains: Norman Bates, Leatherface, Buffalo Bill. His crimes, rooted in a lonely Wisconsin farmhouse, became a blueprint for horror, blurring the line between fiction and reality. The monsters he inspired are fictional, but he was real. Gein's legacy endures, a chilling reminder that true horror can hide behind an ordinary smile. Ed Gein's story doesn't end with a verdict, but with a chilling question. How does a human become a nightmare? He was not born a monster, but shaped by his mother's cruelty and the isolation of the Plainfield farm. Gein blurred the line between the safe and the sinister, showing that true horror can live next door. His legacy is a warning about the darkness that can grow in silence, and the monsters that are made, not born. The real terror is that he was, disturbingly, human.